Hello, I'm Katie Steckles.
And I'm Peter Rowlett. Hi Katie, what's today's mathematical object?
Today's mathematical object is the Library of Babel, which is an infinite library from fiction. So we had a suggestion from one of our Spotify listeners, I believe, which was, could you talk about the Aleph? And the Aleph is from a different short story by the same author. So this is like a fiction short story. And the Aleph, I believe, from having briefly read it, it's a lovely story. It's one of these kind of incredibly famous, like, award-winning short stories. But it's about a single point in space that's like the size of a marble on the 19th step of a cellar staircase through which you could see the entire universe. It's a short story. It's just like about a guy and, it is like his girlfriend, someone, like there's a whole kind of human context around it, but like he goes round to this person's house and they're like, yeah, if you go in the cellar you can see it, you have to lie on the floor, turn all the lights off, and just catch it out of the corner of your eye. And he tries it and you can literally just see the entire space, the whole of space-time through this single point, and it's weird, but that's nice. But there is a much more mathematical and interesting story by the same author. So the author is Argentinian writer called Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, I believe, and he's written another book, another short story, which I'm aware of because I previously did a maths project where this became one of the kind of features of it, and it is called The Library of Babel. And essentially it's just a little story about some people who live in a universe which is a library. And it's described as being composed of an indefinite, perhaps infinite number of hexagonal galleries. So they're hexagons already, quite a mathsy space. And the library effectively is just a series of these hexagonal rooms that you can go across to the next one, or you can go across in a different direction to another one. You can go down a little spiral staircase, and each one of them is a part of a library, so it's full of books. And in between each of the hexagons, there's a little vestibule with a sleeping cupboard where you can stand sleeping upright, and a shower and toilet. And that's the whole universe. I'm assuming there's somewhere to get food. It's not made clear at any point. But this is like a person who lives in the library, and they're sort of speculating philosophically on the nature of existence because this is all they've ever known, and the library is a thing. And the place that I came across it was, there was a theatre project that I worked on a few years ago, which kind of pulled in like various different ideas from slightly trippy maths fiction, basically, including like, what is the nature of the universe, including the Poincare conjecture, obviously, and this story. So it was notionally set in the library, but also Amelia Earhart, the missing aviator, was there, and there was a mathematician who was there to kind of like talk about stuff, and there was a hypersphere and some other things. But anyway, this is where I first came across this, and the thing about it that I quite like is that it goes into some detail about the way that the library works in ways that kind of make it mathematically both more and less interesting. They reckon that the library is infinite, perhaps infinite, but at the same time, they specify the number of books in each hexagon and the number of pages and the number of letters in each book and the size of the alphabet, from which you can presumably deduce that there are a finite number of possible books here, right? And they go a little bit into like what the implications of having all possible books are, because that's the theory, is that the library contains potentially every possible book. And it's not clear how anyone could possibly know that. But the sentence reads, each wall of each hexagon is furnished with 5 bookshelves. Each bookshelf holds 32 books identical in format. Each book contains 410 pages, each page 40 lines, each line approximately 80 letters. And they also at some point state that there are 25 orthographic symbols. Okay. And I kind of looked into this because the original, obviously, version of this was in Spanish. And the Spanish alphabet doesn't have exactly 26 as the English alphabet is. Yeah. It's more than 26, but for some reason there's 25. And the claim is that this is 22 characters, comma, full stop, and space.
Okay.
So whatever alphabet this is, and I guess it's a fictional universe, so it can be whatever it is, but yeah.
But if you specified if you didn't specify all those things, you could make it infinite, right? Quite easily, but...
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess like the notion of a book being finite is probably necessary for it to be a meaningful book. And then, of course, the hexagon is whatever it is, and that there is a necessity in some sense to the finiteness of it. But it's still big, right? It's a big old set of books.
And was the library infinite?
Well, this is the thing. It's described as indefinite, perhaps infinite.
Okay.
This is great. You can dig into this so much. There's also the sentence, the library is a sphere whose exact centre is any hexagon and whose circumference is unattainable. And I guess some of this is intended to be this sort of religious, philosophical, in-universe speculation by the people who live in the library. But actually, there is a bit later on where they explain that potentially, if you go far enough, you'll start seeing the same books again.
Okay.
And like, I don't know how you would know, right? Because you open the thing and it's just some letters, right?
Yes.
And you'd have to check every single letter. I mean, it would just take you a long time, and you would almost, like, the probability of you finding it would be zero, right? Effectively, in this thing. So that, like, you get into all these sort of questions about when you've got such a big number, right? So it's 410 pages of 40 lines of 80 letters. So that's, I'm going to just calculate what that is. Hopefully not too loudly on the recording that I'm typing into a calculator. So 410 pages, 80 lines, 40 letters, I think is what I just said. So there's 1.3 million characters per book. And then I guess it's 25 to the power of that number.
Yep.
Right? So this is just absolutely nonsense. My computer's gone, have you considered using the internet? Yeah, I'll try Wolfram Alpha. Thanks, computer. But like literally, this is a massive number. And the theory is, and they sort of go into a little bit of this in the story, that theoretically every real book is there, right? So, Alice in Wonderland is there. Alice in Wonderland in French is there, in every possible language.
But I reckon it uses more letters than that, right? That's the slight confusion.
The first 410 pages of Alice in Wonderland are there.
Yes.
And pages 2 onwards of Alice in Wonderland and pages 3 onwards of Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
So it just gets absolutely ridiculous. According to this, it is a 1,834,097 digit number.
Okay. Seems reasonable.
It's a lot. There's a lot of possible books.
I was slightly worried that that's a huge number, but in an infinite library, most of these hexagons are going to be empty. But you've allowed repeated books, so now I'm less worried.
Yeah,
about that.
well, this is the statement, I guess, and so like they also have all of this, the same kind of stuff that you get in the sort of pi is normal. Let's just assume that like everyone's life story is somewhere in the library. And if you can find the book that contains the full story of your life, you can find out what's going to happen to you in the future. But obviously you can't, because you can't find that book.
Yeah, and a representation of the zip file of your favourite movie that's not been made yet is in there somewhere, and it's all that sort of stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
And there's a couple of things. So, like, at one point, someone apparently, it says, one book which my father once saw in a hexagon in circuit 1594 consisted of the letters MCV perversely repeated from the first line to the last. And, like, if you think about all the possibilities here, right, every single letter can be any of the letters. That level of structure is so improbable that the probability of finding that book is zero, right? Basically, effectively in this massive set, and like the notion that someone's dad once found that book, maybe it's just lying, maybe it's just full of rubbish, and like it said MCV on the first page or something. But even that is still deeply unlikely. But like it's this sort of contradiction of like everything is possible. Every possible book is in there, but at the same time, the probability of any single book, like even just being coherent, right, even just having sentences, is so tiny, and like it's that sort of monkeys with typewriters thing, right? That you can combine letters in any possible way, but the proportion of combinations of letters that are actually valid or meaningful or have any kind of use whatsoever is really, really tiny. So I've always found this like a really interesting story, because it doesn't really care. Like it just goes in. It describes how this library is set up, and there's a little bit of philosophical speculation about this, and kind of stories of people who've spent their entire lives looking for a thing, and had existences within this library, but actually that's kind of it, and it just it just ends. And the last bit of it is basically this sort of hope that if you travel far enough in any direction, you will eventually find the same book, and that kind of implies some sort of order or structure to this library, which is the kind of hope that this person lives on. But I just think it's really nice, and I definitely recommend reading it. It's old enough now that it's just free online. Like if you search for the Library of Babel or Borges, which is Borges, you will find this. Just as like a free PDF, but it is really, really lovely.
It's sort of fascinating as it's obviously an analogy for searching for meaning in the universe, and I'm slightly reminded of the physics teacher in school telling us that there's nothing to stop all the atoms in a double-decker bus suddenly vanishing from here and appearing on the other side of the universe. It's just extremely unlikely to happen. In a sort of quantum physics sense. Yeah,
on a smaller scale, I was always I remember learning that if you just sort of tap your hand on the table for long enough, I don't know whatever that means, but eventually all of the atoms in your hand will be lined up in exactly the right orientation at the same time as to match the atoms in the table, and it'll just go straight through.
But long enough is.
I'm going to keep trying because I'm a kid. But there is that the possibility of order, I guess, is always there. But I think, and a lot of these sort of things, like some kinds of primality testing, things like that, rely on probabilistic stuff, right? So essentially, all of the stuff that we know is making the assumption that things that are incredibly unlikely are just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we trust that the bus will arrive on time and not end up on the other side of the universe.
But that seems not so different from hoping to find an exact copy of the book that you've already seen, or. There's sort of religious aspects to this, I guess, that you're implying an order to the universe that you can't observe, I guess. Yeah.
And I think that the other thing about this is that this notion of a sort of library like this has been really nicely paralleled in fiction. So like Doctor Who has a big, universe library where they're running around, which is what you do in Doctor Who, but, they go through rooms that all look identical and that kind of thing. There was one of the most recent series of Star Trek Discovery, I think they had a bit where they were in a library that was kind of hexagonally-ish. Like there was definitely a Borges-y vibe to some of the bits in it. And I like the idea that this is sort of a meme that pops up to essentially just mean, I guess the library represents knowledge in some sense. But the funny thing is that this library does not, it technically contains all knowledge, but not in a useful way.
Because it's drowned out by the nonsense, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Get Dewey on it with the decimal system, right? See if Dewey can categorize these books into something that's actually useful.
Do you know anything about the author? Why is this a sort of mathematical background for these books, or scientific?
I'm not too sure, actually. Yeah, I say the Aleph is another one of the same by the same author that also has this sort of infinity and probability and that kind of stuff woven into it, but a lot of his writing is just essentially fantasy, like philosophy and fantasy, and I really like the fact that he's not kind of shied away from the mathematicalness of it, but at the same time completely ignored the mathematical certainty that none of the things that he describes as happening are actually possible to have happened in any finite amount of time, I guess. My dad saw this. No, that's not true. But there is an incredibly tiny probability, but
also.
Yeah.
Creatures on this planet evolved and have eyes,
Well, true. Yeah,
very difficult. Okay, if you want to catch up with us, the best way of doing that is we have a Patreon called Finite Group, patreon.com/Finite Group, and members of that group were able to, and in fact are, listening to some episodes of this series being recorded.
And if you want to find us, we're both on Twitter and on Mastodon. I'm at Steckles.
And I'm Peter Rowlett, and we both blog at aperiodical.com, which is where you can find more episodes of this podcast.
And if you have any suggestions, like the person who suggested that we talk about Borges, please drop us an email, objects@aperiodical.com.
The music is Funk Game Loop by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons.